Ukrainian emergency services say that Russian strikes on Kyiv have killed 8 people and injured more than 60 others. This latest attack comes as tensions between Ukraine and the US over efforts to end the war with Russia continue. Journalist Emmanuelle Chaze is in Kyiv and she joins us now. Good to have you on the program once again. Now, you are in the capital where this deadly attack occurred. Can you give us a sense of the devastation that's happened there and how are residents in Kyiv coping?
Good evening, Girish. Well, this has been a night, like a very violent night here in Kyiv, such as one we haven't seen in a very long time here in the Ukrainian capital. You have to imagine more than 70 missiles, more than 150 drones were launched by Russia all across Ukraine, but they were also aiming at the capital, Kyiv. I myself woke up at around 1 a.m. with explosions, so I could feel the wall shaking, my ceiling lights shaking as well, and there was extensive damage all across the city with, you've mentioned it, 8 people killed in those strikes, as well as over 70 injured. And there are still people who are unaccounted for. Rescuers are still looking for those persons under the rubble. So it's a population in shock here in the capital. And certainly, as seen from here, as seen from Ukraine, we actually do not see any sign that Russia is willing to decrease the amount of strikes it launches against Ukrainian population.
And on that point, is there a sense in Kyiv and across Ukraine that Russia is now intensifying its offensive across the country, particularly after that Easter truce?
Totally, especially given that there was no such Easter truce. There was, of course, a little bit more quietness in the sky in the form of those strikes over the Easter weekend, but Russia continued its strikes on the front line during this Easter weekend. And in fact, it's been 44 days that the US came forward with a temporary ceasefire, 30-day ceasefire proposal, a proposal that Ukraine had agreed to, provided that Russia would also agree to it. But during those 44 days, we've seen daily strikes against Ukraine, the latest of which was that large-scale attack we've just mentioned. But just yesterday, I'm going to mention another strike, an FPV drone, a Russian drone, just crashed into a bus full of bus drivers that were just heading to work. 9 dead, 55 people injured. The city of Kyiv was also hit last night. So for the Ukrainian population, it's very hard to see any sign that those strikes are winding down from the Russian part.
And just a short time ago, we had word from Reuters that's reporting that one of the missiles that struck Kyiv was a North Korean ballistic missile. What does this tell us about, the foreign players who are getting involved in this war?
Well, this is a point that Ukraine has warned against time and time again with its allies, is that Ukraine doesn't only have to fight against, Russian weaponry, it also has to fight against missiles that were provided to Moscow by its North Korean ally. It also has to fight kamikaze drones that were engineered by Iran. It also has to fight against missiles which components also come from the US, from European allies, and now there are a lot of questions around the rifles that would have been delivered to Moscow by Beijing. So Ukraine doesn't only fight against Russian equipment, also it fights against all those, things that are being sent to Russia by its allies.
Yes, and President Volodymyr Zelensky, he's currently holding a press conference with his South African counterpart there, and he will be cutting short that trip to Africa. So what was he aiming to do? What is he aiming to do in Africa?
Well, Africa is really a very important continent, should I say, for Ukraine. And to begin with this visit in South Africa, Volodymyr Zelensky wanted to point out just at that. Why? Because even if the diplomatic ties, they will be less visible than, for example, with the EU allies, Ukraine used to ship, a huge amount of grain to the African continent. In that regard, it is very important to maintain ties on an economic point of view, but also We know that Russian propaganda has really infiltrated the African continent as a whole, and it's important for Ukraine also to come forward to explain what this war is doing against Ukraine, against Ukrainian civilians. And in that regard, such diplomatic visit to South Africa was really relevant for Ukraine on a diplomatic point of view.
And Emmanuelle, now Donald Trump, he is accusing President Zelensky of hampering the peace deal for saying that Ukraine won't recognize Russia's occupation of Crimea. Do Ukrainians see it that way?
They do not, simply because it's not a matter of wanting to surrender Crimea or of wanting to agree to the U.S. proposals. Volodymyr Zelensky, even if he wanted to give Crimea on a plate to Russia, because that's basically what this recognition would amount to, he simply cannot do that. Why? Because the territory of Crimea belongs constitutionally to Ukraine. This is enshrined within the Ukrainian constitution. This is Article 134. You can look it up online. And the president of Ukraine simply cannot just hand in any territory. This is actually the case for Crimea, and it is also the case for any other illegally occupied territory that belongs, as per law, as per Ukrainian law, to Ukraine, and that is also recognized as such since 1993 by the international community and international law.
Okay, Emmanuelle Chaze in Kiev, thank you so much for giving us your time, and do stay safe.
Thanks for having me.